we have to remember that this is a very unstable situation with a lot of psychological warfare, particularly from Hamas. So I don't think it's unrealistic to expect that a couple of days from now they will have reached a new ceasefire agreement, a temporary one, where Israel will get some hostages out, because Hamas is doing its best now to drag this out, to buy time. And it's doing that because the longer this war drags out, the more international pressure there'll be on Israel. So they are negotiating. We know that for a fact. Israel is negotiating with Hamas through Qatar, uh, basically around the clock. So we could hear another short ceasefire being announced.
What do we know about the latest targeting within Gaza? It's now moved to the south as well as the north. Just give us a sense of which areas are being targeted.
Yes, so as we expected, of course, the north, but also the south now. We hear that there have been wide-scale attacks in the city of Khan Yunis, which is in the southern part of Gaza. And we expect, of course, the death toll to rise as well. We've just heard now that in the last couple of hours, the fighting has been very intense. And Khan Yunis is a densely populated area, despite Israel trying to get people out of there. All of southern Gaza is really where most Palestinians are right now. And for Israel to try and avoid more civilian casualties, it has published a map of Gaza, which is divided into zones, and each zone has a number. And throughout the day, Israel will notify Palestinians about which zones to be in. Now, it sounds practical, and it might sound like a good idea, but realistically, 1.7 million people to have them move around every other hour, I don't think that that's realistic, really.
And also, where are they going to go? I mean, I was reading that the Israelis are encouraging them to move to Rafah, but we know that the Rafah crossing is closed, and Egypt has said, we're not going to open that. We're not going to let Palestinians in because we don't want them to leave their homeland. But I mean, could we see a scenario potentially where there are, 2 million people on the border in horrendous conditions and they can't get over?
That is potentially what we're looking at, because Israel has made it clear that northern Gaza is not habitable, and we've also seen the images coming out of there. Many have lost their homes, so there's really not much to come back to, and it's still an ongoing war zone, and that really just leaves them in southern Gaza. Now you can make safe zones of some sort, but eventually, if you want to eradicate Hamas, then you need to go everywhere in Gaza, because Hamas is everywhere. Their tunnel system is under the entire Gaza Strip, and their military infrastructure above ground is also in hospitals, and schools, and mosques. So this is just an impossible scenario. It's one of probably the most difficult military operations in the world to eradicate a terror organization that is so embedded in an area with so many civilians.
Is there a sense that Israel is changing its approach and its tactics in this war after, much stronger language from the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken? He was talking about the massive loss of civilian life, saying that it can't be repeated in the south.
Yeah, what we hear now is that the United States has basically given Israel a couple of weeks to operate in, if it continues on the same scale that it did in the first couple of weeks, because the more civilian casualties you see, the more the United States has to simply take a stand back and to criticize Israel. It can support Israel to a certain point, but we've already seen way too many civilians being killed. So Israel is trying now, I think, a different approach, but eventually they're going to have to go systematically after Hamas in southern Gaza. And unless Egypt will allow more people to cross the border, it's just a horrendous situation, really. And Egypt has said many times they are not willing to allow any refugees in the Sinai Desert for two reasons. First of all, they don't want any refugees. Second of all, they don't want to be seen complicit in the transferring population from Gaza into a different territory.
Are we now at a point where all those talks that the Qataris managed to secure that pause in fighting for a week? I know those have broken down. Clearly the fighting has begun. What are the chances of that being restarted, or is that very much off the table for now?
I don't think so. We have to remember that this is a very unstable situation with a lot of psychological warfare, particularly from Hamas. So I don't think it's unrealistic to expect that a couple of days from now they will have reached a new ceasefire agreement, a temporary one, where Israel will get some hostages out, because Hamas is doing its best now to drag this out, to buy time. And it's doing that because the longer this war drags out, the more international pressure there'll be on Israel. So they are negotiating. We know that for a fact. Israel is negotiating with Hamas through Qatar, uh, basically around the clock. So we could hear another short ceasefire being announced.
And I also want to ask you as well about reporting in the Times today that a number of the bereaved families from the October the 7th attacks are now calling very loudly, very strongly for Benjamin Netanyahu to resign. How reflective is that of the wider view within Israel, and how much pressure is he under?
He's under more pressure than ever. I think he's slowly going down in Israeli history as one of the most unpopular prime ministers, and especially because he failed to prevent October 7th as a leader. So the calls for him to resign have really been going on since day one, but they're growing stronger and louder the longer we get into this war, and the more that people realize that Netanyahu is still playing politics. He's still thinking about the day after. He's still trying to cater to his coalition partners to make sure that they back him the day after the war, so he doesn't have to resign. And people, of course, find this appalling that someone who's responsible for the biggest failure in Israeli history is not only he's not concentrating on the war, he's concentrating on surviving politically. So yes, a lot of growing calls, and he's extremely unpopular now in Israel.
Jotam, always good to speak to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That is Jotam Confino. He's a journalist in Tel Aviv. So